But 22 years have gone by, and when you reach a certain age, your guard goes down, and you say, oh well, what the hell.
Grace Kelly's successor, Vera Miles, was to be announced in 1957. Alfred Hitchcock never forgave her once she became pregnant. At 95 years old, she is at last disclosing the shadowy side of Hollywood's most renowned director, the manipulative actions, the brutal vengeance, and the secret that caused her to retire from the limelight forever. However, that is hardly startling in and of itself. New pictures of the psychostar have surfaced, and her admirers are in disbelief at her transformation. The legendary Vera Miles's mother, Vera June Ralston, was born on a farm close to Boise City, Oklahoma, on August 23, 1929. During her childhood, she witnessed firsthand how families battled to meet basic nutritional needs during the Great Depression. Tom Ralston, her father, was an electrician and a minister, striving to provide for his family of four by whatever means necessary. However, Boise City living was particularly challenging. During the Dust Bowl, when widespread dust storms ruined crops and rendered farming nearly impossible, the community was among the most severely affected. The Ralstons were forced to evacuate. They sought a better life and relocated north to Kansas. Vera was born and raised in Kansas, first in Pratt and then in Wichita. Vera, her mother, and their siblings were left to fend for themselves when their father ultimately departed for Alaska. At a young age, she realized that hard work paid off. She started working as a Western Union operator typist when she was 14 years old, and she did it all while going to school during the day. She was too busy to whine about how tiring it was. The employment was crucial for her financial stability. She was a 1947 graduate of Wichita North High School, an iconic building with a strong sense of community. She was still a girl from a little town, but she was starting to fantasize about bigger things. In 1948, she joined the Miss Kansas pageant, marking the first major step toward her ambition. Her victory earned her a spot in the Miss America competition in Atlantic City. Despite competing against hundreds of other women, she managed to secure the third runner-up spot. Everything changed at that moment. She was noticed in Hollywood and signed a contract with RKO Pictures, where she would make $100 to $25 per week. That works out to almost $1,500 weekly in today's dollars. It was a beginning, though it was little. Howard Hughes, a tycoon who oversaw RKO, was notorious for micromanaging the careers of his actresses. He cared for Vera on a personal level, sending her to acting courses, and appointing Bob Miles as her driver. Studios took great care to mold their budding stars throughout that era. They put up glitzy picture sessions, orchestrated media stunts, and cast them in modest parts to gauge their abilities. This is the route Vera took, making cameos in low-budget films that didn't launch her career but did keep her going ahead. The following day, her life and profession were irrevocably altered by an event. Hughes had assigned her Bob Miles as her driver, and she ended up falling in love with him. In November 1948, they tied the knot. Hughes was mad as hell. He fired Bob on the spot because he took it as an affront to his dignity. He continued, nevertheless. All of his drivers were allegedly had to be homosexuals after that, making sure that not a single one of them would ever go on a date with an actress from his agency. After then, Vera's tenure at RKO came to an end. For a brief instant, it appeared like a new beginning when she sold her contract to 20th Century Fox. A mere 6 months after that, Fox let her go. The formal justification was never provided. She may not have been recognized for her star potential. Perhaps Hughes was involved in some way. In any case, Vera was unable to get a contract, and was having difficulty obtaining employment. Some years down the road, she'd make light of the fact that the top studios in town had passed on her. She was newlywed and struggling financially at the tender age of 19. Unfortunately, Bob's family couldn't afford for him to go law school. In addition to caring for their 2 girls, Vera had to take any acting gigs she could get her hands on, which meant going from TV series to tiny parts in films. On April 9, 1950, Deborah Lynn came into this world, and on November 5, 1952, Kelly Francis was born. Despite the challenges she faced as a mother and a professional, she persisted in her endeavors. She landed the part of Soil in a TV drama that aired in the early 1950s. Many aspiring young actors got their starts on live television because of how popular it was back then. The show wasn't huge, but it did provide her with a more valuable gift, a foot in the door at Hollywood. It was at this time that she made a sensible choice. Although an actress with that name existed, her given name was Vera Ralston. She began going by her first husband Bob Miles's surname in an effort to clear up any misconceptions. She went on to get cameos in various movies and TV series thanks to her work in the dirt. Producers in Hollywood were continuously on the hunt for new talent. Something about Vera seemed noticeable. Warner Brothers saw her talent and offered her a contract, opening doors for her in the business. This was the golden age of Hollywood, when many women began their careers on television before stepping into the film industry. After that, Vera landed parts in films like Psycho 1960, The Searchers 1956. This Hollywood attempt was much different from the one in which she later became a leading actress for Alfred Hitchcock. Studios promoted three-dimensional pictures as the next great thing in 1953, when the film industry was attempting to compete with television. Vera, whose real name is Margot Miles, was designated Miss Third Dimension as part of a marketing push by Warner Brothers. She remained in the limelight thanks to the title, which was mostly an advertising ploy. She modeled the 3D goggles for the camera as part of the advertising campaign. She was also in consideration for the lead part in House of Wax, a major 3D film by Warner Brothers at the time. Phyllis Kirk, however, was cast in the role. It was disappointing to lose House of Wax. After the film's enormous success, Kirk's career skyrocketed. Yet Warner Brothers continued to cast Vera in roles, same as 1953's The Charge at Feather River, but they were smaller. One more 3D picture. She may have been better off in the end if she had won House of Wax, however her career trajectory would have been altered. Kirk became synonymous with horror films, while Vera's career went in a different direction. A few years down the road, she would demonstrate her mettle in more nuanced parts when Alfred Hitchcock placed her in psychological thrillers. Although she was making progress in her professional life, her personal life was in shambles. Back in 1948, when Vera was just starting out in her career, she tied the knot with Bob Miles. As an actor and stuntman, Bob put in a lot of time and effort on set and had a tough existence. However, Vera's main goal was to cement her position as a professional actor. Deborah Lynn was born in 1950, while Kelly was born in 1952. However, they were already divorced by 1954. Divorce marked a watershed moment. With her marital problems behind her, Vera was free to concentrate on her work. Bob continued working in the field, although he was never really famous. It was only the beginning for Vera, though. Eventually she would tie the knot 3 more times. However, her career goals became her top focus after her first divorce. Maintaining a healthy work-life balance was an uphill battle for classic Hollywood actresses. After considering her options, Vera decided to press on. She co-starred with Gordon Scott in the 1955 RKO Pictures adventure picture Tarzan's Hidden Jungle. For Scott, who was making his cinematic debut as Tarzan, it was a watershed moment. A nurse named Jill Hardy, played by Vera, is involved in a conflict with poachers while helping a jungle doctor. Although the plot followed a tried-and-true Tarzan template, an unexpected turn of events occurred behind the scenes. Gordon Scott and Vera were romantically involved while filming, and they tied the knot not long after production concluded. Their marriage outlasted the show, but only marginally. They finalized their divorce in 1959. Although Vera's career was unaffected by Tarzan's Hidden Jungle, it did add another chapter to her Hollywood tale. Adventure, western and thriller films were her current credits. Above all else, she was demonstrating that she was more than simply another beauty queen attempting to get into the acting industry. In 1955, Vera Miles appeared in an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents called Revenge, which was the first time Alfred Hitchcock saw her. He decided to make Revenge the series premiere instead of another episode, because of how well she portrayed a frightened wife. There was more at stake than simply the casting call. That Hitchcock had finally met his soulmate was evident. He began courting Miles as a potential new inspiration in 1957, when he signed a 5-year personal contract with her. Prince Rainier III of Monaco had recently married Grace Kelly, who had retired from acting, thus Hitchcock was without his trademark leading woman. It was implied in the promotional materials that Miles was supposed to take over for Kelly. Her charisma, talent and attractiveness were just what Hitchcock was looking for. A crucial distinction, however, did exist. Miles, in contrast to Kelly, who was content to follow his every command, was fiercely independent. Their relationship would be shaped by that disparity, and ultimately lead to its breakdown. Their 1956 psychological docudrama, The Wrong Man, was one of their earliest joint projects. A musician falsely accused of robbery, played by Henry Fonda, was Christopher Emmanuel Manny Ballesteros. Rose, Miles' wife, goes insane under the stress of her husband's incarceration, which he portrayed. Her performance was subdued yet really moving. Miles demonstrated the emotional and mental toll the incident had on his wife. While Fonda's character maintained composure, the emotional weight of the picture was rendered by this contrast. Her performance was hailed by critics as one of the most emotionally charged in all of Hitchcock's flicks. The Wrong Man also included Hitchcock's first realistic film. Jackson Heights, Queens was the site of the film's principal photography, as well as incorporated case-specific real-life circumstances. Atypically muted for a Hitchcock picture, Bernard Herrmann's soundtrack served to heighten the film's gloomy mood. There was a lot of buzz about The Incorrect Man, but it bombed at the theaters. Hitchcock was adamant about casting Miles as his next great leading lady. Each aspect of her image was something he personally worked on. No color other than black, white or gray could she wear, a constraint imposed so that her gaze would meet his. He collaborated closely with costume designer Edith Head to create her clothing. Miles fought back, in contrast to Kelly, who went along with Hitchcock's plan. When it came to her professional life and public persona, she was a free spirit. The opposition's attitude caused friction. When Hitchcock cast Miles in Vertigo in 1958, that was the last straw. Judy Barton, who played Madeline Elster, needed an actor who could convey the complexity and enigmatic nature of the character as well as her more vulnerable and frantic side. For her, Hitchcock had grand ambitions. Working closely with Edith Head, he began pre-production by doing film tests and outfit fittings for the character. Then a dramatic shift occurred. Midway through 1957, filming was delayed due to production delays. Miles was expecting her third kid at the time. She had no choice but to back out of the project due to this. The news was too much for Hitchcock to handle. Now that she was walking away from the part, he had invested time and resources into getting her ready for it. The recasting allegedly cost him several $100,000, and he grumbled about it. She was succeeded by Kim Novak, and Hitchcock's Vertigo rose to prominence as a landmark feature. Hitchcock then lost interest in making Miles famous. He had her play a supporting role in Psycho 1960, although his initial intention for her was far larger. Despite her doggedness, Lila couldn't hold a candle to the nuanced parts that Hitchcock had cast Miles in prior to their breakup. Some think he cast her in Psycho more for the sake of conformity than creativity. Everything had gone wrong between them by the early 60s. Although Hitchcock paid his respects under the contract, he stopped promoting her work. Miles left him behind, as he centered his attention on emerging leading ladies like Tippi Hedren. One of the best westerns of all time, The Searchers, was released in 1956 and she was the leading lady. She portrayed Martin Pauly's Jeffrey Hunter romantic interest, Laurie Jorgensen, John Wayne's character, Ethan Edwards, and Martin's quest to rescue a girl abducted by the Comanches spanned years in the film. Laurie stood for all that Martin had to lose, in contrast to Wayne's vengeance-driven figure. After years of anticipation, she finally faced him in a scene that showcases her strength. Her passionate and furious speech was a release of pent-up rage. Though fleeting, the scene showed how the film's major mission had an impact on the protagonist. Monument Valley, Utah, is well known as the setting for John Ford's westerns, and it was here that The Searchers was shot. Unlike other films of the same era, it dealt with controversial topics like racism, vengeance, and atonement. The film's cultural importance led to its 1989 inclusion to the National Film Registry. This job was pivotal in Miles' career. She was more than a sidekick. The film's intensity was well balanced by her emotional presence. In 1962, 6 years after that, for The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, she worked with John Wayne and John Ford again. She portrayed Hallie Stoddard this time, a lady torn between two guys whose views of the West couldn't be more divergent. Tom Donafone, played by Wayne, was a quiet, rough rancher who was madly in love with Hallie. The idealistic lawyer Rancy Stoddard, played by James Stewart, fought to establish order on a dangerous frontier. There was more than romance at play when Hallie made her decision. It represented the end of the Wild West and the beginning of a more civilized era. The last scene was one of the most emotionally powerful parts of the film. As a humble but wrenching memorial to the man she loved unconditionally, Hallie laid a cactus rose on top of Tom's casket. Ford emphasized the film's gloomy contemplative tone by shooting it in black and white. It explored how history may conceal the reality behind legends at times, and went on to become one of his most admired works. Because of the love and courage that Miles bestowed upon Hallie, she becomes the story's protagonist. She may have been famous for westerns, but her serious performances were as impressive. She tackled a completely different role in Alfred Hitchcock's The Wrong Man in 1956, the same year she acted in The Searchers. Rose Balestraro's life comes crashing down when her husband is wrongfully convicted of theft. Based on a true tale, this film featured a harsh and realistic approach, a departure from Hitchcock's regular thrillers. Miles depicted the gradual breakdown of a lady under immense pressure with devastating authenticity. Miles collaborated with A-list actors all during her career. Particularly noteworthy were her partnerships with James Stewart. Their characters' connections were genuine and grounded in reality. In 1959's The FBI Story and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Stewart had a special gift for making his characters feel real, and Miles was just as good at keeping it real on screen. Their connection on screen elevated the already captivating quality of their flicks. A Disney film regular from 1964 to 1972 was Vera Miles. In 1964's Tiger Walks, her debut film with the company, she portrayed Dorothy Williams, a mother who battles to save a circus tiger from cruel treatment. 5 additional films came from the fruitful collaboration with Disney that began with this. Her film credits include Those Callaways 1965, Follow Me Boys 1966, and Gentle Giant 1967. The Castaway Cowboy 1974 and The Wild Country 1970. Whether playing the part of a strong and caring mother or an independent widow, these roles frequently portrayed strong women. Fred MacMurray's portrayal in Follow Me Boys was complemented by her warm and welcoming performance as Vita Downey, a small-town housewife. By working with Disney, she was able to reach a younger demographic, and her performances in these lighter parts shone that she could still evoke powerful emotions. Her work in thrillers and dramas was impressive, but it was during her time at Disney that she established herself as a reliable, reassuring screen presence. She took on more complicated parts in the 60s and 70s. Madeline Buckman was the character she played in Hellfighters, 1968. Played by John Wayne, the character's estranged wife. She had to show both power and vulnerability as the character, a lady attempting to mend a broken relationship. She also found success in the television industry. She played the role of Irene Elder, a lady left for dead in the woods following an airplane disaster, in the 1978 film, And I Alone Survived. The miraculous continues with Helen Keller. In 1984, she portrayed Kate Keller, a dogged mother who believes in her daughter's abilities despite setbacks. Her 1983 return to the part she played in Psycho was one of her most notable performances. Returning as Leela Crane, now Leela Loomis, she appeared in Psycho 2 almost 2 decades after Hitchcock's original picture. This time, she was more than simply a fiercely independent sister seeking redress. She had been plagued by the ghost of Norman Bates for years, and now as a widow, her wrath was boiling over. Believing he remained a danger, she and her daughter Mary plotted to drive Norman back into sanity. Despite critical qualms, the film's $34.7 million in box office receipts more than covered its $5 million production costs. Miles's portrayal lent credibility to the narrative and demonstrated how trauma and loss may cause compulsive behavior. Her presence restored the film's sense of continuity and proved she could still hold her own in the acting department. From 1960 to 1961, Vera Miles was a beloved guest star on Barbara Stanwyck's highly regarded anthology series, The Barbara Stanwyck Show, for which she received an Emmy Award. Different dramatic stories were given in each episode. Despite the show's low ratings, critics gave it high marks for acting. In one of the episodes, Miles made an appearance and won television's top accolade for her strong performance. Earning an Emmy in the 60s was about more than simply the trophy. That serious acting could exist on television was proven by it. It was proof that Miles could effortlessly switch gears from big-screen acting to TV. This accolade catapulted her to the ranks of the most illustrious actresses of her day and paved the way for an abundance of television roles over the decade. Changes were occurring in television during this time. From 1965 to 1969, series like The Big Valley changed the way women were depicted on TV, and strong female protagonists were becoming more popular. The strong matriarch of a prosperous ranching family, Victoria Barclay, was portrayed by Barbara Stanwyck, quite unusual for westerns of that era. Even though Vera Miles wasn't a resident of the Big Valley, the changes in television viewing habits occurred at the same time. She was a cast member on several iconic series from the time, such as The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Miles was a perfect fit for the creepy, cerebral storylines that these series were famous for. She was gifted in portraying multi-layered, powerful characters. Her performances at this period mirrored Stanwyck's revolutionary character, even though she did not star in The Big Valley. Miles had a starring role in one of the most distinctive and terrifying episodes from the 1964 season of The Outer Limits, an episode called The Forms of Things Unknown. What made the episode stand out was her ability to handle psychological strain. Even now, it's one of her most talked about TV shows. Lovely but Lethal, an episode of Columbo from 1973, featured her as Viveca Scott. Nearly 10 years later, she portrayed a clever and merciless character this time around, a cosmetics magnate entangled in a murder probe. Miles had a talent for making even brief appearances in science fiction, mysteries, and dramas feel substantial. In 1984, Vera Miles appeared in The Initiation, her last big-screen role. She joined the slasher film craze of the 1980s with this Larry Stewart production. The protagonist, a young lady plagued by nocturnal terrors, and her sorority sisters are murdered at a department store initiation ceremony. The majority of the film took place in Dallas, Texas, and although reviews were divided, the picture went on to acquire a cult following among horror enthusiasts. Miles has previously played Lila Crane again in 1983's Psycho 2. One of her last film appearances was in The Initiation, however, prior to her eventual departure from the performing profession. Even in her 50s, she maintained her mesmerizing screen presence after decades of hopping from psychological thrillers to westerns. She retired from acting in 1995 after a career spanning 5 decades. Her career, which started in the late 1940s, came to an end with her appearance in the film Separate Lives. She originally gained fame after being the 1948 Miss Kansas and became a fixture in the public eye through beauty pageants. She then headed to Hollywood not long after. She collaborated with renowned filmmakers such as John Ford and Alfred Hitchcock, accumulating an amazing body of work during her career. She chose solitude over further celebrity, and unlike many performers, she did it on her own terms. There were highs and lows in her personal life. Gordon Scott, who had recently replaced Tarzan, was her husband in 1956. She played Tarzan's love interest in Tarzan's Hidden Jungle, where they first met. Soon after, they were married. Yuma, Arizona was the site of their civil wedding on April 14, 1956. Their common desire to start a family was evident shortly after when they adopted a child who had been orphaned during the Korean War. However, despite appearances, their marriage was far from perfect. As his career took off, Scott was always on the go. Further escalation of tensions occurred in the late 1950s. On March 2, 1960, after being together for 3 years, they filed for a divorce. While Scott persisted with his job in Europe, Miles was granted custody of their 1957-born son, Michael. When she was cast out of the main part in Vertigo the same year, her career took a surprising turn, Hitchcock saw her as his leading woman to follow Grace Kelly's retirement, so he signed her to a personal contract for 5 years. She had already started appearing for promotional images during the film's pre-production. She was pregnant when production delays forced her to step away. Kim Novak was chosen by Hitchcock to replace her. Anything that Miles's professional trajectory was forever altered by. Much has been speculated about the potential impact of Miles's more realistic acting technique on Vertigo, despite Novak's remarkable performance. As a result, she and Hitchcock became estranged. They collaborated again on Psycho, although she was never again his favorite leading lady. When she wed actor Keith Larson, her private life took a leap ahead. 16th of July 1960, after the birth of their son Eric on April 30, 1961, they appeared to have settled into a comfortable routine. Miles had 3 children from her prior marriages, and Larson happily took on the role of stepfather to all of them. Their relationship, however, had difficulties as time went on. They broke up in November 1969 due to the divergent paths their careers took them. Miles used the prevalent legal phrase of the time, extreme cruelty, to justify his divorce petition. Their 11-year marriage came to a formal conclusion in October 1971. They reached an agreement on child support for Eric, and divided their assets equally, totaling $231,471. Miles moved away from the limelight after leaving Hollywood and resided in Palm Desert, California. Retirement solidified her long-held preference for seclusion, which she had previously exercised by avoiding interviews and public appearances. She avoided the Hollywood nostalgia circuit, and never published a memoir, in contrast to many of her contemporaries. The actress Jessica Biel had to depend on anecdotes from Miles' grandson, instead of interviewing her for her 2012 film Hitchcock, which represented her. Some think the stresses of Hollywood and her troubled relationship with Alfred Hitchcock contributed to her unwillingness to talk about her profession. Some believe her preference for seclusion was her true nature. For whatever reason, it further shrouded her legacy in obscurity. The legacy that Miles left behind was self-evident. She had no qualms about leaving the industry when she did so.